To be a accredited school with the New England Association of Schools and Colleges means you are part of a group of schools around the world, about 350 schools in 85 countries now, that hold themselves to high standards and recognizes that to be a successful school in the world today requires more than just having students and teachers in buildings. And the accreditation process, when you're with NEASC, takes schools really on a journey of sorts that starts with a more compliance-oriented review and then moves into a focus on learning and the impact of learning on particularly the young people in schools. So it's a process that we take schools through, and it's a process that leads not necessarily to a final destination, but kind of to an ongoing process of reflection and improvement, and in some cases transformation of a school community in partnership with other schools. Because of the nature of the work we do, it's with peer reviewers who are helping schools, other schools around the world than their own, where they are, to meet these standards, and helping to review schools in line with the kind of guiding principles that we have set up for schools. So being part of the NEASC family, you might call it, means being part of an ongoing journey of growth for an institution. So we really approach the process of working with schools in a two-stage way. The first stage is the stage where we look at what we call foundation standards. So these are standards that must be met by a school in order to continue in the process with us. So before we want to talk in too much depth about the learning and observe what's going on in classrooms, we need to establish some ground rules and some basics, what we might call the Gatekeeper Standards. So we look at things like the mission of a school, and are there guiding statements that undergird the operation of the school? And what about the structure of governance within a school and the structure of staffing? Are there policies in place that protect children? Are there safety measures in place? And what are the finances like? Is it a balanced budget? Is it clear where the money is coming from and where it's going? So we take these early steps to establish the foundation. It's the building blocks on which the structure of a good operating academic community is built. Once a school meets those standards adequately in our assessment, we then move into the learning focus. And that's where we shift the conversation from meeting standards to learning principles. And the learning principles, and we have 10 of them, that are not so much standards to be met as they are principles meant to inspire, principles to be embraced, principles to align your programs with. And those principles are meant in some ways as provocations to schools and invitations for schools to look carefully at how things are working in their classrooms and outside their classrooms. Because we think of the school not as just a place where learning happens between the hours of the class period, but throughout the day. Not just in the building, but everywhere on a campus where the kids and the adults may be. We also have changed things recently to talk more about learners and less about students and teachers and administrators and parents and board members. We say learners because that means everybody in the school is a learner. That's at least the way we want schools to see themselves. And as learners, that means we don't know everything. That means sometimes we make mistakes and we fall short. That means we can always learn from others and be coached by others. So we approach learners as a way of saying, hey, everybody, you're all in this together. These principles are not just for the kids. They're for everybody within that community. You've established your foundation that's strong enough. We're not going to spend too much time now going back and reviewing policy documents. And when we come to visit your school, we don't want to be reading through binders of materials. We want to be sitting down with the kids. And we want to be talking to the parents, and we want to be visiting the classrooms and the laboratories, and we want to go out on the playing field. We want to sit down in the cafeteria, and we want to learn from the kids, from the adults, what's it like to be in this community. We have in mind, as visitors, these 10 learning principles, because those are lenses through which we want to see various elements within that school. And so what the school gets through this process is a report back to the school of, here's what we saw. And we've already seen what the school has written about themselves. So for a year, the school does a self-study or internal reflection. And then for a week, we come in. We look at what the school has done, and then we do our own visit with our own observations and issue our own report, which we hope is for the school motivation for the next stage in its own journey, as well as a kind of affirmation, and in some cases correction, addressing issues that need to be attended to by the school. But that final report is, with the final accreditation decision, is usually one that doesn't stop the process. It just is further provocation for the school to continue in its journey. The learning principles that we have designed are intended to reflect the kinds of learning and the kinds of mindsets toward the learning environment that we think are appropriate for schools, now and into the future. And they are meant to be provocations that are not definitive answers to schools of here's what you have to do, but of opportunities for schools to maximize the learning in their environment. So to take one example, learning principle number 9, we call learning space and time. That has to do with the use of space, physical space, as well as time. 2 resources that schools have that are finite in how we have a particular place where we have learning happen, not just in classrooms though, can also go outside classrooms. And we also have the limitation of time, because there are only so many hours in the day, and we know that. So what the learning principle looks at is, does the school use its spaces and time in a way that maximizes learning as the school defines learning? So we have schools, by the way, always start with making sure they have a clear understanding and a shared understanding of what high quality learning looks like. Once they have a shared understanding of high quality learning, then you can look at these learning principles in ways that can be very powerful. Because when you ask about space and time being used appropriately, what we're saying is, have you arranged the spaces and the schedule to maximize the learning in those places and in that time? For many schools, the use of space and time is not focused as much on learning as on efficiency, order, tranquility, that we all know where everybody is at the right time and in the right place, rather than on maximizing each child's journey toward great in-depth learning that sticks with them. So an example of that would be very basic. When we're on a visit, we would say to a school, show us your shared understanding of high quality learning, your definition of learning. How would you describe learning in its ideal? That's what everything should now point toward and lead to. Typically, a school would say something about building a collaborative mindset and building students who are interpersonally competent, in words more or less like that. So then we say to ourselves, let's go look for that. And if we then see in classrooms, for example, students sitting in rows being talked at by a teacher, we would say, we're not sure that you've used the space appropriately to maximize this definition and realize this definition that you've articulated. You yourself have said you want to build interpersonal competencies and collaborative spirit in these kids, but they're sitting in rows We went to the library, and everywhere we saw signs that said, shh, don't talk, be quiet. And we saw the hallways being jammed with kids during passing time, and lunch kind of a chaotic experience. So when exactly does the collaboration and interpersonal development happen? So that's just an example, and I'm not talking about this school at all, but that's an example of what we might see in schools where we say, okay, we're going to use this learning principle number 9 to say, let's have you as a school rethink, are you maximizing your use of space to ensure that you're meeting this goal of building interpersonally collaborative-minded young people? Because we think maybe there's a disconnect. And then the school's role and job is building plans to make the space and time more likely to lead to those kinds of learning impacts that the school themselves have articulated. So we have spent many days in your schools at various stages through the process of accreditation, and in this case, re-accreditation. Unfortunately, it's not all been in person because we've had to do some of these visits virtually. Although I did notice in one of the classrooms today, students talking with one of our team members on an iPad, and that's exactly how we conduct these visits. We try as best we can to make sure that they are as close to equivalent as possible to being in the same room talking with somebody like that. What I saw in my very brief time here was actually a lot of kids collaborating and talking with each other and making plans with each other and working together. I also saw students working alone, and that's okay too, because even while we emphasize collaboration in so many schools, including yours, students also need to be individually competent and able to stand on their own 2 feet, as we say, and able to know where to go look for something on their own and not always with the teacher or with a peer, but to do it individually as well. So I saw some of that as well today. I also found in one student in particular, a second grade student, amazing amount of talent blended with humility. A second grade girl who speaks 4 languages and didn't think it was that big of a deal, that she speaks one language with her mother, a different language with her father, and then comes to school and studies English, Spanish, and German. And that humility in a second grader gives me real hope, not only for that girl and her future, but for your school and how it is helping young people develop their own talents and their own interests. I also saw a short musical performance today, an instrumental piece delivered by about 20 students that was remarkable. I was honored to be presented with this very short performance, and I think there were 7 different instruments that they were playing in this orchestra, and it was evidence to me of students being able to express themselves in a creative way with a tool, an instrument, to come together in that orchestra and to deliver something of beauty. Had nothing to do with an exam, because I saw exams happening today too. Had nothing to do with just me doing this thing that is for me and my own development and my own growth and my own qualification. It had to do with personal development for sure and competence with an instrument, but it had to do with that in order to serve a larger purpose of being part of this orchestra. And the teachers themselves, the conductor and I think the other teacher, were themselves, one was conducting and the other one was playing an instrument. So that tells me that they too are part of this. They're not just the teacher to a student, but they are part of this overall kind of orchestral composition, meant not just to serve the individual, but to serve this collective group and to observe and to perform for this group of observers that happened to be in the building that day. And that was a real treat for me. When you're accredited as a school, it means you are open to feedback from the outside, not just from parents and not just from teachers or a ministry official, but from a group that is composed of peer educators, other people from other schools who are able to give feedback to a school in a way that is constructive and supportive. Just like an individual child benefits from outside feedback that's not, a parent or a teacher, but it's another entity interested in that person's success. We do that for schools. That is, we provide feedback in a way that is constructive and meant to lead to better operations, more healthy practices, more sustainable and effective, impactful learning experiences in schools. That's what accreditation leads to for schools. One of the features that NEASC accreditation offers schools is recognition that when it offers an American-style high school diploma, it is recognized by NEASC, which is the oldest accrediting agency in the United States. And accreditation came about because the variety of diplomas in America 100 years ago, when this first started, and today, is so varied that regional accreditation agencies were developed, NEASC being the first one, in order to assess in each school, does the diploma meet general standards of good practice? We're a non-governmental, non-profit agency that confers this recognition on a school that it meets these standards and principles so that universities can say, okay, that's a student that we can accept because they're from a school that has been reviewed and meets the standards of expectation for what constitutes a high-quality program. And in the American model, we have a decentralized system where individual high schools can determine what are the four-year requirements for graduation. That's why accreditation is so important, because it provides a bit of a measuring stick and an opportunity to recognize that this school meets generally accepted, and in our case, international standards of good practice in schools. So when a parent or a teacher looking to move to a school is looking at a school, it's really important to consider, is it accredited or not, and who accredits it, and what are the standards that accrediting agency is holding that school to. And in our case, we're quite transparent about what those standards are, and most of the leaders in these schools know those standards because they themselves have been trained to be visitors for us out there in the world of accreditation around the world. And so we're happy to have the support of peers here helping in that process.